Now the US-led resolution on Sri Lanka has been passed. So how do you think that the Sri Lankan state should actually respond to it, and do you think the approach the government is taking now is the right approach?
Well, I don't think the approach has crystallized, and this is only natural because it is uh, it is a serious situation, and democracies usually take longer to achieve policy cohesion to respond to international crises or international relations problems. So I'm not surprised about that. I think, though, that we can identify a few things that should not be done. There are some responses that are inadvisable. One response, which I do see from a certain element in society, in civil society, even within the political system, is to welcome the resolution as completely harmless and completely benign and as not being against Sri Lanka at all. There are those who feel that, well, it may be against the government, but it's not against the country. I think that response is wrong. I think the resolution has to be studied. It is not true that the resolution only asks us to implement our own LLRC proposals. It's not true because the wording itself says that it expects us to go beyond the LLRC recommendations. So I think the resolution is negative. I think it is potentially dangerous. So I don't think it should be welcomed. On the other hand, neither do I think that our response should be one of denial, of saying, now, okay, I mean, who cares? This is not going to affect us in the least. That kind of response, a response of being in denial, is rather like an ostrich policy. Simply because the ostrich hides its head in the sand, it doesn't mean that the lion or the tiger or whatever the predator isn't going to come and jump on it. So I don't think it's wise to be in denial or just shrug it off. Nor do I think it is wise to simply take a posture of isolationism, isolating oneself from the UN system or the international community. I think we must always stay in play, always have a dialogue, though we disagree on principle. So one has to be very realistic. The resolution contains a danger, and that danger must be faced and it must be overcome. We have to transcend it. We have to understand what the dangers are, and we have to be active and even proactive in meeting those challenges. So I don't think either passivity or welcoming it is wise, nor do I think that simply turning one's back on the Human Rights Council or the resolution or the world is a wise move. These two extremes should be avoided, and at all times a middle path should be chosen.
Okay, so but anyway, the LLRC, as you mentioned, is one of the main features, or they're calling for the full implementation of the LLRC. But there's been
and going beyond.
Yeah, and going beyond. But there are also like 3 months after it had been released, there have been varied statements about what is going to be implemented or what is not, and there is not a sort of official stance, so we are not very sure about what the government is actually going to do. So could you kindly comment on that? How do you think it should be fully implemented? If not, what clauses of the report should be implemented?
Well, I think the answer to that was contained 2 days ago on the front page of the Island in the lead story. And the lead story was very, very interesting. It was a statement by the ambassador of a country that has stood by Sri Lanka for decades in war and in peace, and including in Geneva, 2009, 2012, and that is the Russian Federation. The ambassador of the Russian Federation to Colombo, Mr. Mikhailov, I believe, His Excellency Mikhailov, had clearly and unambiguously stated that Sri Lanka should implement the LLRC report. Now, this is not the United States. This is one of our key friends, and I say key friends because it is one of our supporters, our guarantors in the UN Security Council as well. And when this friend says this, I completely agree with him. I've been saying this independently before. We should implement the LLRC proposals in their entirety. Obviously it cannot be done overnight, but there should be, like we had once the accelerated Mahavali, an accelerated program of reforms, not because the Human Rights Council has said it, but because we have lost 30 years by not doing these things. We have been an independent country for 64 years. Think of it as a human being, you know. And of the 64 years, half has been spent, among other things, butchering each other.
Because have
a tremendous loss of life.
Okay.
So, I mean, these are things that we should have done, which we didn't do, and we have to catch up for lost time, and we have to catch up in the 21st century. So we should implement the LLRC report and all the provisions of our own constitution, our basic law, in all parts of the country as soon as we possibly can. And as I said, we shouldn't go an inch beyond that. And then we can face the Human Rights Council, the UN system, the whole world, and say, look, we've done what we think we should do, which has been recommended to us by our own commissions, by our own constitution, and we have proven that we are willing, able, and keen on reform and a new post-war order in Sri Lanka.
So coming back now to the vote on the US-led resolution, I think it was in one of your interviews, it was maybe with, I think it was with BBC Sandesh, you said that Myanmar was defeated in a vote that was brought in on the UN Human Rights Council in 2009. So there is nothing leveled against the country now because it's changing. So do you think that the vote, those who voted against the resolution in 2009, some of those countries voted in favor of it this year? Do you think that happened because they didn't see any change in those last 3 years?
Professor Nai says that for a country to prevail, it depends on whose story wins. I repeat that. Whose story wins. It's not who wins the war. I mean, it's important to win a war, but the final outcome, he says, depends on whose story wins, whose narrative wins. Now, he's from Harvard University. There's somebody else at the other end of the spectrum, Fidel Castro, who has said the same thing before, and using a different phrase, he talks about the battle of ideas. So, obviously, Sri Lanka has not been able to win the battle of narratives, the battle of stories, or, if you want to use Fidel's phrase, the battle of ideas, which is why we lost in Geneva. So, of course, there are powerful forces arrayed against us, the 2 Channel 4 films, and so on and so forth. But from 2009 to 2012, in the global battle of ideas, we have not prevailed, obviously. Now, this is a serious matter because we have to, government propaganda, just won't do it. In any case, you must know how to convince people, and the only way to do that is to tell the truth and to say it with credibility. We have to win the battle of arguments and the battle of stories. Our story, our narrative, which has to be truthful, against the narrative that is now flowing throughout global public opinion. Boutros Ghali, a former Secretary General of the United Nations, said at UNESCO, where I represent Sri Lanka, he said that there is a new superpower in the world, and that is global public opinion. Sri Lanka has yet to realize this. You can't fight this battle and prevail with an attitude that we don't care about the rest of the world. I mean, I once wrote that mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all, is not the best methodology in fighting this battle in the international arena. Self-satisfaction is just not good enough.
Okay, but in addition to that, do you think that if Sri Lanka as a state had done more in those 3 years, that we would have been able to swing that vote?
Well, 3 months before, actually, for about a year before we won the war, I had been writing about winning locally, winning globally, winning the war, winning the peace. That there are too many countries which have won wars but have not won the peace. I gave the example of Israel in 1967, which had this brilliant Six-Day War, historic, brilliant military victory, but now for 40 years it's been bogged down because it has wasted the opportunities of that brilliant victory. So I've been predicting this and saying, even at our moment of highest achievement, that we have to have a clear conception of a better Sri Lanka. A Sri Lanka that is better than the one that gave rise to the war. And from 2009, after our Geneva victory, I didn't rest on those laurels. I kept writing that this is what we must do. This is why these countries supported us in Geneva, these 29 countries. These are our friends. If we are to keep this global coalition together, we must fulfill the promises that we have made and the promise that Sri Lanka holds out, the promise of peace and prosperity and equity. And I said those things at that time, and I warned that if we do not do this, our neighbor will turn and our coalition will break up and the international space we have will shrink. And I'm sorry to say that I was proven right. Now, having said those things and made those predictions and pushed for the sort of reforms that the LLRC is now talking about, I think I paid the price because I was, what happened after our victory in Geneva in 2009 was that a couple of weeks later I was recalled. I mean, I was fired, basically, having helped win the resolution, the battle in May 2009, but having expressed my views on how we should go forward and not run the risk of losing. That is supposed to be one of the reasons for which I was inexplicably and arbitrarily removed from it.